Welcome. This is the fourth Dhamma talk on the Anapanasati Sutra. Wanted to propose that we talk about sati a little bit more, mindfulness a little bit more, add to our discussion from last week. And I also gave you some homework. But I thought I'd also provide a framework for that homework. And the homework, because you weren't here, Sergio, was...
I'm absolved.
You're absolved of homework. It is simply to work on one of the frames of reference, one of the foundations, and
I may have
report
done
on it.
homework before.
Accidentally, or it's kind of... I think you may have done that many times before. And I'd like to provide a framework for that. And so I was thinking of adopting some reflections on how ancient Indians are recorded to have spoken to each other in the time of the Buddha. And curiously, and I think it kind of boils down to about three things. One is mindfulness. Mindfulness of speech in this case, but it's the mindfulness of the Majjhima Nikaya number 62, sort of remembering that you have duties to purify your speech, and so you should plan the beginning, middle, and end of your speech before you speak, and stay mindful while you're speaking, both the beginning, middle, and end, and then take a half-second reflection on after you've spoken. And another reflection of how they spoke to each other was, and it just doesn't make for good reading to read complete sentences, but where people are never cut off. They're allowed to complete their sentences and complete their thoughts. And so people are given speech space. So I was thinking we could do that for each other when we're practicing talking. Let's see. Other thoughts are that when people spoke to the Buddha and other teachers, what was the first thing they said before they asked a question? I heard you say that X, Y, and Z. They would repeat what they heard. And then they say, when I heard that, and then they would often repeat the thing over again so that everyone could hear it one more time. I thought of this. And so they didn't jump to 10,000 feet above the air, above their situation. They thought, it's very cause and effect. When I heard you say this, I thought of this. So, and then you can ask your question. So you don't have to go through a formal recitation of everything that was said, but if you could try your best to summarize what you heard and what triggered the reflection or the question, that would help. Or if you just wanted to make a comment, that's fine too. It doesn't have to be in the form of a question. I guess that's kind of it. So how to summarize that? Mindfulness, what did I say? Mindfulness, sort of planning out beginning, middle, and end, giving people speech space, and then sort of speaking in a manner in which people can sort of see the cause of whatever your thought or reflection is. And you can also practice your mindfulness in the memory sense that we delved into last time. All right, so let's get started. Does anyone have any questions? Before we begin, any comments? Any thoughts? Okay. I thought I might start by telling you the stories of mindfulness, the similes, I should say, of mindfulness. I don't know when the last time you've heard sort of stories of similes of mindfulness last, but I was reflecting on some of the stories, and I think they paint an interesting picture of what mindfulness is. I mean, you weren't here last week, Sergio, but we talked about smriti, the Sanskrit word for memory, to remember, the verb to remember. The root word is where sati comes from. And the Buddha defines sati in terms of memory throughout the canon. And we also talked about the diversity of vocabulary that the Buddha used, not just the word mindfulness or sati, but he used the term samasati and miccha sati and mutti sati and satindriya, or the faculty of mindfulness. And so just because we converted samma, I made the point last week, into an adjective, doesn't mean that, we can just somehow allow ourselves to discount that adjective. It's samma sati is slightly different than sati, and it takes a more refined, slower sort of reflection and analysis to understand that. And so we went through the sort of definition, I think, of sati, and kaye kayanupasi viharati atapi sampajano satima vineya loke abhijadumanasang. So a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body in the body, ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with respect to the world. And that is the formula of the first foundation of mindfulness. What is the formula for the second foundation of mindfulness? Vedana vedanasu viharati atapi sampajanyo satima vineya loke abhijadomanasanga. So a bhikkhu abides contemplating or focusing on feelings, and ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with respect to the world. What's the third one? Mind, citta. And so I think you got the picture.
Is that the same as sankharas?
Which one?
The mind. Is not.
No. Did you hear that from Goenka or Bhikkhu Bodhi?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think Goenka thinks of sankharas as like distractions of the mind or something like that.
Well, mental formations, I think Bhante.
Well, that's Bhante Ji and Bhikkhu Bodhi talk about volitional formations and mental formations.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the first?
But we know that sankhara. The first foundation of mindfulness is foundation of mind.
No, you said something and I didn't hear what you said. No.
Oh, in terms of sankharas?
It's okay. No, it's gone now.
All right.
I didn't hear what you said.
It happens. If you think of it later, let us know. And the fourth one? Dhammas, in the plural. Yeah.
Yes.
So a bhikkhu abides or dwells, contemplating or focusing on dhammas, in dhammas, and or with dhammas with respect to dhammas, and ardent, alert, and mindful, subduing greed and distress with respect to the world. Interesting, the Satipatthana Sutta, which I'm reading together with this one, obviously, for obvious reasons, because the Anapanasati Sutra sets you up with this grandiose introduction, telling you more details about how the monks live together than practically any other sutra. It's this grand introduction, and the Buddha, on a full moon night, just tells everyone how happy he is that everyone's working so hard. And he says, I'll just stay another month, by the way, because you're doing so well. I want you to really I want to really encourage you to put forth more effort. And he gave this teaching at the end of that fourth month. And he designated the day, and he went into a little more elaboration. It's one of the rare times he talks about sort of his core teachings and how the monks were sort of divided up according to the 7 sets, which is the Bodhipakkhiya, the wings of awakening. He mentioned it at his death. These were my important teachings. He mentioned at critical moments they are his important teachings, and where do you find it? In this discourse as well. And so he had monks working on the sort of 5 faculties, the 5 powers, etc., and approaching things from that way. And they were working with senior monks, were teaching junior monks, and junior monks were teaching monks under them, and there was a sort of structure and order, and it was all very pleasing to him. And then he taught the 16 steps. The core teaching of the Anapanasati Sutra are the 16 steps of breathing in and breathing out. Now, some interesting reflections on the Satipatthana Sutta. To me, I look at the Satipatthana Sutta almost as the extent of the field. What is mindfulness of the body? And the Buddha says, well, you can do this, you can have this set of reflections on that, and they're all the same. There's, sort of insights. You can do this and this and this. And he names 6 or 14 exercises that you can do depending on how you count. And what are those 6 exercises in the Satipatthana Sutta? Well, lo and behold, the first one is the first tetrad of the Anapanasati Sutra, which is breathing in and breathing out. And what are the 4 steps of the first tetrad? The first are not trainings, but they're pajanati, they're discernments. And then 3 and 4 are sikati, or trainings. So you breathe in, and breathing in a long breath, he discerns, I'm breathing in a long breath. Breathing out a long breath, he discerns, I'm breathing out a long breath. Breathing in a short breath, he discerns, I'm breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a short breath, he discerns, I'm breathing out a short breath. And so what's 3 and 4? He trains with that. Actually, that's 4, but 3 first is experiencing the whole breath body. And so we kind of agree that the word kaya means body, in this sense, like this is my body, like the physical body. If you know Hindu philosophy, you know there are all types of bodies, right? But kaya is very mundane, very concrete. It's kaya, it's body. But then we have this word thrown in front of it, sabakaya. He didn't say kaya, he said sabakaya. It's the whole body. So how does that change it? Well, we tend to be lost in little corners of our breath body. We experience our physical body through the act of breathing when our eyes are closed. Because we're breathing, our nerve endings kind of wake up, blood vessels flow through the body, and you become very aware of that vibrancy inside the body. Sometimes the world and all of its agitations can create what can be like a pockets where you can only feel certain sensitivity in certain areas and not in others, and things don't flow very well. So he's telling you to sort of open up and feel the breath in the whole body while you're breathing in and while you're breathing out. The 4th, then, tranquilizing bodily formations, which is a weird word, but we should. Tranquilizing, I always say calming, because I find tranquilizing, I think of tranquilizers like horse tranquilizers, or something, like a drug or something. I think that's just such a weird choice of words, but Bhikkhu Bodhi chose it. And what is bodily formations? Kaya Sankara. Okay.
They say bodily fabrication.
Same thing. You're reading Tanajan's translation. Tanisao Bhikkhu's sign. He goes by Tanajan to his familiars. That is a good, excellent translation to call Sankara in this sense.
Calming bodily fabrication.
Mm-hmm. Calming is good, and fabrications is good. Formations, I think fabrications is better because of the emphasis that meditation involves a doing. It's an action. Whereas formations, there can be involuntary formations, of course. There can be involuntary fabrications, but it tends to skew more towards the active side. That your mind, whether you know it or not, is creating formations or fabrications.
What is that? To calm a bodily fabrication. What does that
Well,
mean?
the Buddha defines kaya sankhara, bodily fabrications, and how does the Buddha define it? When he's talking, but also Dhammadina famously does in Majjhima Nikaya number 44, Chula Vedala Sutta, the small debating sutra or whatever. A fully enlightened arahant nun discusses with her former husband aspects of the Dhamma, and her husband is not fully enlightened, and he asks her what bodily sankhara are. What are kaya sankhara? And she says, breathing in and breathing out. And the Buddha tells us in this discourse, anyway, right? In the Anapanasati Sutra, he gives us a little hint that he says that this breath body is a body within bodies. So he's talking about the breath body. He's talking about the body of sensations, how we perceive the body through the breath, by means of the breath. So that's interesting. What does that tell you then? That the whole, normally we think, the Buddha then goes on to say that the first tetrad corresponds to mindfulness of the body. If you want to develop mindfulness of the body, what do? You start with developing the first tetrad, right? If you want to develop mindfulness of feeling, you develop the second tetrad. If you want to do mindfulness of mind, third. Mindfulness of Dhamma, fourth. But that's interesting, because aren't we meditating on the in and out breath, which was just defined as a body within bodies? So isn't that interesting that the core of all four foundations is mindfulness of the body? It's a subtle part of every one of the four foundations. But where does it say that in the Satipatthana Sutta? It doesn't. The Satipatthana Sutta does not explore many issues about Satipatthana method. It explores mindfulness. He's basically asking the question, how do I stay mindful of the body? And he gives 6 or 14 exercises on how to do that. And by the way, we can list them if you want, just to have them in the back of your mind. So the first one was the first tetrad. The second one,
Within the body?
what's that?
Within the body?
No, I'm talking about the Satipatthana Sutta right now. I just wanted to make sure it was in the back of your mind. So we have the 4 postures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sitting, walking, standing. Then we have full awareness in all postures, so sampajanya. And we have the elements, earth, air, water and fire. And then we have 32 parts of the body. And then the 6th one is the 9 charnel ground contemplations.
That's before the impermanence?
Before what? Yeah, it's after the elements, I think. Did I get the order right?
I think so.
Or it's going off memory.
That one's 32.
So that's Majjhima Nikaya number 10 he's looking at right now.
The in between there is the full awareness. In between the postures and there's the full awareness of movement.
Yeah, that's what we said. The
Okay.
full awareness of all postures, I call it. Yeah.
Okay.
Including defecating. Okay, so I wanted to just make that note that the Satipatthana Sutta doesn't really make mindfulness of the body as fundamental as Anapanasati Sutra does. You can find that thought elsewhere in the canon. The Buddha gives other discourses where he says developing mindfulness of the body is important. Sariputta gives a very interesting discourse in the 20s where he says you can understand the Four Noble Truths, which is tantamount to what? To realizing the path, right? He compares that to, he says that you only need to focus on the four elements, one of those aspects, doing mindfulness of the body, and you can fully realize all the fruits of the path. And he takes you through how to do that in a very interesting discourse in the 20s in here. And there's another discourse where the topic was how to be inwardly composed and calm, equanimous, in other words, in a sense, and focused. L-theanine, sort of focused, green tea focused. And the Buddha answers by doing mindfulness of the body, meditation, and has you just develop mindfulness of the body meditation, and then takes you through a curious way into right concentration. So just doing mindfulness of the body fulfills all of right mindfulness, even though we just said it's four things. I just defined it as four. He does one thing. Then he takes you through a very interesting definition of right concentration. So he has you develop the mindfulness that... now remember, mindfulness also means mindfulness with respect to remembering what your duty is. And so your duties are to understand suffering, abandon the causes of suffering, realize the end of suffering, and develop the Noble Eightfold Path. And so the mindfulness, when the Buddhists asked the question, what is the governing principle of mindfulness? What does that mean? And he said, it's remembering, that mindfulness is remembering that have I completed my virtue? Have I brought it to fulfillment, or are there any gaps in my virtue that I need to fulfill? And then are there, same thing for sort of samadhi, are there any gaps in other aspects of the holy life that I haven't fulfilled? And what can I do to fill those voids in my practice? And then with respect to your meditation practice, but he mostly focuses on panya, on discernment. Is there any gaps in my discernment? Have I not fully understood impermanence, dukkha, anatta? And then the last one has to do with have I not realized any of the fruits of the path, and what can I do to fill those? And so we know that there's this understanding of mindfulness. So with that as a background, so going back to the sutra I was originally describing, he says, so I need, so he basically says that thinking, with respect, we mentioned this last time, that the Buddha had a thinking practice. I cited Majjhima Nikaya number 19, the relaxation of thought practice. He basically says, he takes the right resolve, the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, and he thinks about renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. And he says, is there any part of my life where I haven't brought those to fulfillment? And he tells his son in Majjhima Nikaya number 62 to reflect as well prior to meditating. Is there any part of my life that needs work? But he says it in terms of, is there any part of body, speech, or mind that I'm for an action that I'm about to do, while I'm doing it, or after doing it, that leads to my affliction, or the affliction of others, or leads to the affliction of both myself and others? And if so, you should abandon it. And then he says, Is there any action that I'm doing, about to do, doing, or have done that leads to my non-affliction, the non-affliction of others, or the non-affliction of both? And those you should do. Those are beneficial. And encourage them to continue. Right? So that's a way of understanding mindfulness as well, is it's the action. It's remembering that your principal duty is right effort. That is abandoning unskillful actions and developing skillful ones. And so the Buddha has basically he has this mindfulness of the body, then he has you turn on this duty of abandoning unskillful things and having you reflect on that in a sort of thinking practice. But you can do that with respect to your body. Am I breathing in a way that leads to my comfort and enjoyment and happiness? And then he has you do that with what he calls a lot of vitaka and vichara, or thinking and evaluation. Then he has you do it with a modicum of thinking and more evaluation, and then he has you do it with more thinking and less evaluation, and then he has you drop both thinking and evaluating. And it's interesting because the first jhana, what is present in the first jhana? The first two factors are vitaka and vichara, thinking and evaluating. And in other things, and then in the same sutra, he has you, once you've dropped those two things, he doesn't describe that, by the way, as the first jhana. You're just developing the first foundation of mindfulness, the body, and all your thoughts are about the breath and the body, and you're in that jhana. He doesn't say that, but then he has, once you drop it, he has you experiencing rapture, and piti, and happiness, and one-pointedness. But then he says you're in the second jhana at that point, after you drop it. One indication that the first one, which he didn't describe as the first jhana, is because in that discourse, I think I'm thinking of Majjhima Nikaya 125, if you want to go look at it, he has you drop. He says, a monk having abandoned the 5 hindrances, then he goes into the description of this interesting description of using contemplation of foundation of mindfulness of the body to ask questions about, have I fully developed the path, and developing questions surrounding the fulfillment of the path, and that's when you're in the first jhana. And the second one is a result of having abandoned vitaka and vichara, second jhana. So, let's see. Yes, please.
Regarding the fruits, in the reflection of the fruit, are you talking about like the 4 stages of enlightenment? Are you Sotapanna? Are you talking about those type of fruits?
Yeah, but the Buddha doesn't describe that in detail every time. Sometimes he just talks about the goal of the path being the third noble truth, realizing the end of suffering.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that sutra I was reciting, that he was referring to the end of the path, so the 4th stage of arahantship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted to tell you about the similes of mindfulness, and I went on this long attempt to summarize for you what we had discussed in more length perhaps last time. But I also wanted to give you some background to let you know that mindfulness is a little bit more complex than you hear people talking about in the media and in books and in the West. Oh, there he is. There's my friend Dave. Welcome. That's okay. There's probably traffic. So, one of the similes for mindfulness is the quail and the hawk. Does anyone know the story about the quail and the hawk? So, what is the story of the quail and the hawk? So, once a hawk came swooping down and nabbed a quail. Starts off very suddenly like that. And as the quail is being carted away in the talons of this mean hawk, the quail says, "Oh, if I had only not left my gochara, my cow pasture, literally, but it means here kind of my ancestral field, my territory that I'm confident to be in. And here I had gone wandering off." And he's lamenting his sort, I think, le sort, and his fate. And the hawk says, I could catch you even in your ancestral field. And he says, why don't I let go of you? So he lets go of the quail, and the quail goes flying back to his gochara, and stands up on this clod of earth, looking down at the hawk, and the hawk narrows his wings down towards the back like this and descends right on the quail, and the quail, right at the right moment, jumps to the side of the clod of earth, and the hawk hits his breast against the clod of earth and dies. And so
There was some evilness there on the quail, right?
So the Buddha says that means not to leave your gochara. And so one way he had a very specific meaning, speaking to monks in that sense, to not go wandering off. He's sort of interpreting what subduing greed and distress with respect to the world is. Vineya loke abhijadomanasang. And so you're sitting there trying to meditate, and you're thinking, wouldn't it be nice to go have an ice cream? Call up some friends. Or you're at a monastery, you went all the way around the world to go sit at a monastery, and you're thinking about the dinner you're missing. Or something. Whatever. And so instead of thinking about the 5 strings of sensuality, so the things are, we're attracted to beautiful sights, we're attracted to lovely smells, perfumed smells, we're attracted to sensations of touch and beautiful music and sounds, etc. And taste, food, how could I forget? And thoughts, so not just 5 strings but it's curious the Buddha doesn't say that. So obviously he believes some thoughts are quite harmless to delectate, to enjoy.
Can we turn on the light a little?
Yeah, it is getting a little dark.
Yeah.
One of the second one over would be good.
Thank you, Dave, so much.
Or even that one behind you.
Yeah, whichever.
Yeah, usually that
the
one.
one before,
Yeah, I think.
there.
Oh, it didn't go on. Well, let's turn on. Oh,
Okay.
that's the one I was thinking.
That's something else. The dimmer.
A dimmer. So that's the story of the hawk and the quail. Another one. And all of these meant so much to me when I heard them, and I heard them once, and I have never forgotten them, and I think about them often.
So we should never be hawks.
Regardless. And regardless.
Huh?
The Buddha doesn't talk about that. We tend not to go into these similes in great depth. We just take the Buddha's message for them and remember the story. But I like that conclusion. It's funny though.
And thoughts and the other thing is distraction. I was like, so nowadays, like people get distracted by email and then text messages and all these things. So you can't even have a full thought. Like if you're trying to get a full something like a full-fledged thought, there's no time for that. You'll get interrupted and distracted. So that's Buddha didn't have that in those days. He could have a full thought.
It could have been a hawk. It could have been in any other type of rapacious bird. I think the point was not to leave your gochara. And whether it's a hawk or some other type of danger is going to come and nab you.
Yeah, I think that there was a similar in Carlos Castaneda's one of those books. There was a similar thing about hunters, and they hunted. Everyone has their safe
No, I understand. But
havens,
what
kind of
was
thing.
this?
Mm-hmm.
What is
Similar
that?
type
What was
of
the
saying.
one?
So the Buddha has us frequently reflect on the pleasures as pleasures. They're not, and the Buddha identifies certain pleasures that are good to develop, such as jhana and meditation and things like that are wholesome. And he also has us reflect on dangers as dangers. And here, the hawk personifies dangers as dangers, recognizing that. But for those people who can't quite recognize that a hawk is danger, recognizing danger as danger, sometimes you just need to be told not to leave your little pen, your foundation of body contemplation, when you're meditating, until you can identify quickly the danger and act accordingly. So if you do find yourself nabbed by a hawk, like you say, a distraction, you fortunately have a chance to come back to your gochara by remembering to come back. You don't have to lament like the quail. Oh, had I not left? You just come right back to your foundation of mindfulness. So, the next one was a traditional, also part of Hindu storytelling, as well as Buddhist. This is a story, I think, in the Krishna tales as well. But the Buddha tells a different way. So, a man, fearing death and loving life, walks into a marketplace, and a beautiful dancing queen, is performing a dance there, and he's set up in a situation where he has to carry a bowl of oil on top of his head, filled to the brim, and a man with a sword follows behind him. And if he drops even but a spill, if it even starts coming down the side of the jar, he gets his head chopped off. That's how intense the Buddha is telling you to be mindful, to walk in walking meditation with that level of attention.
Anxiety.
No, not anxiety, but that
While
focus.
tranquilizing.
That
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
So we can see that's the level of focus you need, though, to really subdue the 5 hindrances and to subdue greed and distress, which are subduing greed and distress can be like a overlay that includes all the hindrances. So that's the level of concentration you need, and that's why right mindfulness can include the first jhana, the right, as I just recited in that Majjhima Nikaya number 125. The next, I thought about that a lot, by the way. I thought, when I was tired on long retreats, I would think, okay, I'm standing here, and I've got to be attentive of every drop that's leaving my awareness, and to try and put as much energy and effort into being as attentive as possible. And I would recall to mind this story that the Buddha gave. And you should have the mindfulness like a man whose turban is on fire and, has to instantly take it off and drop it down. So as soon as you see a distraction arising, you should move that quickly with your mind and to come back to your foundation of mindfulness. Let's see. There's the gatekeeper, simile. Gatekeeper. Does anyone remember that one? I think that's in Anguttara number 7, maybe in the 20s, something like that. That story, the Buddha compares the qualities you need to be a good meditator and to achieve the goal of the path to a royal frontier fortress. And where, I just told you the answer, so I can't ask you the question. Well, let's see if you were listening. So what aspect of the Royal Frontier Fortress is represented by mindfulness? The gatekeeper. So Sergio was listening. Okay. And he defines the gatekeeper as, it's not about this idea that mindfulness is somehow this island that's completely separate from the past and the present. He defines the gatekeeper as experienced and wise. That means you to be a good meditator, sometimes you need a lot of experience of having meditated, and you need to remember those things that helped you in the past to become a good meditator. And you need to call on that wisdom. So it's an informed state. Mindfulness is not neglecting the wisdom that you've learned in the past. It's remembering it. And it's applying it to the present moment so that you can have a better future. It's very connected. I think when we think of life in your life, I think we think of it in a biological sense as kaya, as physical body. But I think when the Buddha thought of life, I think he thought of it as more like a project. And it wasn't founded on kaya so much as kamma, or action, in the sense of action. And so actions that you took 3 years ago when you ate a banana and got more potassium in you and could think more clearly, you made an important decision maybe that changed and altered the course of your... And so the things are... And that decision is still sitting within you right now. But that's just one thread among billions of threads and causes that you have put in, and not just food, but decisions you've made, and water, and how you've breathed as a result of that, and how stress-free or stressful you choose to view your world. All these are decisions that we're taking all the time. Those things happen way far in the past. How we choose to react to an unkind word when we're 4 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 20, those things have an impact about how organically in even the chemistry of our blood, how we respond to other stressors that are similar. The food choices we make, there are complex causes and complex effects going on in an extraordinary level that are beyond the view of just this body. And so if you want to be happier in the future, if you want to avoid the hawks of the future, you start realizing, well, what I've done in the past, I've done in the past. But okay, let me start afresh today and put good causes into my life so that I can experience good results later. And some of those things you've done, you might not see the immediate results. Like you get sick and you start eating better again and sleeping better, but it's not like you get better immediately. Sometimes it takes a week, a month, years, but if you keep doing it consistently, you generally see those results, and those are actions. So actions we take sometimes have immediate consequences, and sometimes they have long-term effects. Sometimes, causes and effect can be quite distant from each other. So when we're thinking about, looking at the human being, we have to be looking in this sense of the human being, not just that the body is born and dies. I mean, the Buddha defines dukkha as, as aging, being born, aging, illness, and death. So he's obviously thinking of it also in terms of kaya. But when you look at it in a more sophisticated view with respect to karma, he also defines it as the 12 factors of dependent co-arising, very sort of subtle mental states. He's looking at it in a very complex, both sequentially cause and effect way, but also circuitous and, what is that called? Feedback loop complex way. Thank you for filling in my words when I'm struggling to find them. So, all right, so that was to introduce this concept of a gatekeeper. So here we are, it's not just about the gatekeeper being in the present moment. It's about the gatekeeper being on guard. But they're doing that out of wisdom because they know what kind of folks come in and cause problems for the Royal Frontier Fortress, and to keep them out. They know how to identify the quick link and shut the gate. But they also know the ones that are going to bring in happiness, and so they let those people come in. So, but you have to be aware. It's not a blind state of being in the present moment like Eckhart Tolle wants you to believe. It certainly helps to be able to do that sometimes. Sometimes you need to stay focused, and you're not just letting anything come in and out. But it also shows you that this teaching that you hear in the West, that mindfulness is having an open mind and letting things come in like clouds and go. No, there's a very clear, and this simile, there's a very clear selective process going on that's based, as the Buddha says, on wisdom and experience, and memory, having a good memory, remembering what the bad characters are and what the good ones are.
To keep in mind.
To keep in mind in that sense.
Is the word for that viveka?
Viveka is seclusion. Mm-hmm. It's a very fundamental part of developing concentration. So we have to be secluded from the 5 hindrances and from unskillful thoughts to enter the first jhana. And it helps to be secluded in space as well. So bodily, kaya viveka, bodily, and then we have chitta viveka, being secluded from the hindrances. So those are very fundamental concepts for meditating. That's why how does the Buddha always teach meditation? What's the first thing he always says when he teaches meditation? Introduces practically everything. He says, a bhikkhu, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down with an erect posture, establishes mindfulness to the fore in front of him, and mindfully breathes in and mindfully breathes out. That's the formula.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? He's talking about location. He's talking about mindfulness of breathing in and breathing out. And he's talking about posture. A lot of those elements are in what we just listed, in the exercises or the ways of being mindful of the Satipatthana meditation, mindfulness of the body.
But doesn't he also include not clinging to anything in the world? He also includes that, not clinging to anything in the world.
Where is that?
In that same formula, sometimes.
Yes.
Was that in the
formula
that I just recited?
Yes.
sometimes. I don't know if it's always.
Clinging
Or shortly
to nothing
Yeah.
in the world. But I'm not sure
Yeah,
of
maybe.
the correct wording.
But anyway, in the Anapanasati Sutra, I don't think it's in there, is it? It's not. That formula is not in there. Nor is it in the Satipatthana Sutta. It's not. That formula is not in there. But maybe you can look it up. Yeah, I've seen it, but I can't remember. I can't think of an example off the top of my head and why that's added in there.
It's almost like that's the foundation. But that's part of it, not just
Yeah,
the only one.
it's subduing greed and distress with respect to the world. It's that third, yeah. And just sitting erect is enough ardency. Even holding yourself in erect posture is a form of describing ardency. And alertness is at the same time in the posture itself. So, does anyone have any questions before we...
So, well, I'll just repeat some of the things I heard, and I don't know if maybe a question will come from it. But if you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, I think one of the risks of reading it from a modern Western perspective is that it looks like a classification system. And the classification system seems to isolate elements from one from the other to make distinctions. And then if you said it this way, but you had a lot of examples like this. That the Anapanasati Sutra talks specifically about breathing, but it cuts through the classification system of the Satipatthana Sutta, so it shows the interpenetration of those all those different and I guess that's helpful.
That's excellent. Yeah.
You know, in Western thought, it's not as if we had the idea of the elements of the body,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess that's Galenic theory,
Mm-hmm.
and which I think at least opens one up to the idea of interpenetration of the body in the world and the environment and all kinds of other different things that we just were talking about. But I think the modern scientific theory kind of limits the breathing, like let's say breathing as air entering a chamber and then it seems to very isolate person from world, and it could be breath from full body breath. It compartmentalizes things. Anyway, I don't know if there's a question there, but it just seemed like that's what I heard from what you were saying, was that the Anapanasati Sutta is one explanation of the interrelationship of these factors, and if you pull one lever or two levers, they may impact other areas, and that the breath is not that helps to explain why the whole body breathing, what that means, I suppose.
Yeah. Some people need to hold a lot of things to gain concentration. So some people can just juggle with 2 balls and be focused, but some people need 4 or 5. And so the Buddha, in some discourses, will sort of load you up with all these different ways of doing things. And it's good for people with really active minds, with really keen minds. And, for example, I gave the Girimananda Sutta, this 10 perceptions, and how the 16 steps is the 10th perception in there. And I also gave the example of Majjhima Nikaya number 62, the discourse, the great discourse to his son Rahula. He gives another set of 9, which is different. But also the 16 steps are at the end, not at the beginning. And the Buddha has you, in Girimananda Sutta, he has you start off with the perception of inconstancy. But in the Majjhima Nikaya number 62, it goes right before you start developing the 16 steps, so there's a different order. And he includes the 4 Brahma-viharas. He has you go through the 5 elements, trying to make your mind like the earth, so that someone could spit on it and the earth wouldn't react, to make it as non-reactive as possible in the way you sense earth element, to make it as non-reactive as possible in the way you sense water. Then he has you go through the 4 Brahma-viharas as kind of encouragements. And so there are different sort of, I think some people need just a clear one path, and they can do the path better. Mm-hmm. So the Buddha teaches individuals, right? And so sometimes he's talking to groups of people that have very active minds, and so people with very active minds love taxonomies, like you mentioned in the Satipatthana Sutta, and they love to, explore different ways of being mindful. Well, how else can I be mindful, Lord Buddha, of the body? He says, well, you could do this. And then, how else can I do that? Well, you could do this. And it's interesting that in the framework of the great discourse to his son Rahula in 62, the 32 parts of the body, or asubha bhavana, the foulness meditation, or non-beautiful meditation, is a way of gladdening your mind, to get it ready for most people think of that as disgusting, but it was sort of a way to cheer you up as well. It's not, there's no sort of
Remind me.
quality in the Satipatthana Sutta for the 32 body parts. It's just, oh, this is a way of doing body contemplation. He doesn't say, oh, you could do this to cheer yourself up so that you can then go back to the breath and be able to better subdue greed and distress. He doesn't, there's no value system in this taxonomy other than telling you in the first 7 lines, there are 7 benefits of doing Satipatthana meditation, which, what's that?
How is it supposed to gladden the mind?
What's that?
In his discourse to the
Like,
Oh, so once you've actually seen the reality of what the body is, the mind brightens, so it's not hankering after the world. It's not
Right.
getting caught by the hawk. And it's bright because it knows it's going to get caught by the hawk, that the person you're in love with might die, their body's going to get old and fall apart, and so instead of clinging to that type of thing and getting suffering down the road from that type of thing, then it brightens your mind to
Because
be
you're
able to,
now attracted to higher things.
yeah.
And so I'll buy it.
It's
It's very secure, this bit.
yeah,
It gets
okay.
there.
It's a different form of brightness than we're used to hearing,
Yeah.
definitely. But he's talking to monks, obviously there. But anyway, so he also has mindfulness of death as a way of brightening your mind. And how can mindfulness of death brighten your mind? You know, it can keep you really focused. The Buddha
Yeah.
has you say, well, what if I don't live until, you know, the end of the next breath? You know, I better be really focused on this breath. So it keeps you free from entering into the hawk zone if you contemplate. And so it makes your mind brighter and more luminous
Yes, it
in that
does.
respect. Because remember, luminosity of mind, which people cite a lot in, as the Buddha having said that he says the mind, O monks, is luminous. And people often cite that. But what he means is he's not describing the nature of mind. He's just describing that the capacity for the mind not to have clouds in it or distractions or hawks. That you actually can abandon those things that give rise to clouds. And that there is an end to suffering. And that's what makes the mind luminous, is that you can develop the mind and you can realize the third noble truth. That's what makes the mind luminous. Is it's a place where nirvana can be attained and experienced. Does that make sense?
I have a question about the Maranasati. So what should be your attitude towards, so should we welcome death, or should we, if we follow the Buddha's teachings, is it about welcoming death, or is it about not, what is the...
No, it's not about welcoming death. Remember the story of the Buddha who taught Maranasati, or mindfulness of death, to his disciples and then left, and he came back and half the monks weren't there, and he said, well, where'd they all go? And they said, well, half of them committed suicide. And he was like, you idiots, that's not at all what you did not understand at all, Maranasati. No, it's not about committing suicide or welcoming death. It should, you should make your wisdom. A lot of people go about their lives thinking there's one way to make my life bright, and going out and partying and having fun, and then they have and they're thinking about their own pleasure, and then they have, say, a death experience where they really see their death just go right in front of their eyes, or they experience suffering to an extreme extent, and then they realize their life isn't just about being selfish and acquiring as much pleasure and wealth as they can and accumulating that type of world, and so they reflect, well, maybe I'm going to start being a more generous person and giving, and let my happiness be founded on generosity and doing good acts, being a good person, and developing myself so that I don't make those kinds of mistakes in the future. And so training their mind. So it's basically dana sila bhavana. And I think that's a result of a lot of people who have a near-death experience. They become, if they really think about it and take it to heart, they develop wisdom in just a few seconds. And instead of neglect, and so the Buddha, for healthy people, he doesn't want people going out and obviously meditating in lions' dens all the time and tigers' haunts for tigers, even though you think that if you read Ajahn Mahabua. The Buddha actually wanted you to, you can actually goad yourself to become wiser, faster by mindfully reflecting on death and developing a wisdom that's wise in light of death, not just wise not thinking about death. And so we tend to sweep things under the proverbial carpet in that sense, and the Buddha is just pulling that big one out from underneath the carpet and having you develop wisdom with respect to that. So I think, both of your points are really well taken, that I view Satipatthana Sutta as being slightly taxonomical, and I see it as a sort of vertical, or horizontal plane of, you can do this, you can do that, you can do that. Everything seems to be flat. It's like a gochara. Whereas, I don't know, it's something like a Russian doll or something. You're in the Anapanasati Sutra, you're actually, maybe you can think of a better metaphor or something, but it's actually like you're doing one thing, which is kaya sankara, in-breathing and out-breathing, and you're applying, while you're doing that one body contemplation, you're referring, everything back to that, and you're developing, sensitivity in, by developing whole body breathing, you can develop energy and combat sleepiness. You can use that whole body sensation to be able to identify faster other hindrances. You know what breathing in an angry way feels like in your body when you fully know what an angry breath feels like on the in-breath, but also on the out-breath. And you can also identify the stages in between, letting go of that anger and dropping it and developing, breathing in such a way that develops non-anger in your heart. And so it's an extraordinarily useful meditation to develop whole body breathing in that sense, because you can be looking at the body, but you can also identify the mind, aspects that are not only present in the mind, but absent in the mind, which is how the Buddha defines mindfulness of the mind. I hate saying that, but which is the third foundation. He defines it in terms of, greed being in the mind or is non-greed in the mind? Is anger in the mind or is non-anger in the mind? Is delusion in the mind or is non-delusion in the mind? Is the mind constricted or non-constricted? Exalted or not exalted? Uttara or anuttara? And etc. So
you're really engaged.
Right.
You're really engaged, and sometimes using your ingenuity to really encourage the sensitivity for the whole body.
Mm-hmm.
It is just it proliferates in a very wholesome.
Right. Way. And so once you've developed that, the Buddha is saying you're still maintaining that, but then take on the view that I'm developing, do it with respect to the, once you've done the 4 tetrads and you get really good at them, you can start using them to develop your energy, your alertness, and more mindfulness, remembering what your duty is with respect to the 4 Noble Truths, and subduing greed and distress. And so you can actually fully develop that foundation of mindfulness. And once that's fully developed, you can, and your mind is continuously developed, you can start developing the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Right.
And so you can bring them to fulfillment. Yes. And it starts off with mindfulness of the factor of mindfulness as a factor of enlightenment, which is mindfulness at a continuous. He calls it, it's translated as unremitting in here. I don't remember how Thanissaro Bhikkhu defines it, but when he defines the mindfulness factor, it's kind of continuous mindfulness going on. But you can't do, if mindfulness is like being open to everything, how could you do that when you're trying to cross the street? So how could you ever have mindfulness, unremitting mindfulness, unless you're Or if you think of it as a mental thing constantly, it'd be exhausting to be thinking that much. You'd never attain enough concentration.
But it's not skillful, because it's not skillful. It's just all over the place. To me, it's just too open. It's like whatever comes, whatever goes. It doesn't develop a skill. It's not able to really see, like the gatekeeper, what let in, what abandoning, it's not skillful.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the Buddha, from all the teachings that I have learned, he was so focused on the skillfulness of things.
Mm-hmm.
From sila, samadhi, panya, everything, the skillful factor was in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the composure,
Mm-hmm.
if everything was skillful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What time is it? It is 6. Does anyone want to share their... Did I elaborate more or help in any way on either of your thoughts or that you shared? Okay. Does anyone have any... I wanted people to share. I don't want to put pressure on anyone, obviously.
Are we recording?
Huh?
Are we recording?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you have any thoughts that you would like to share on any of the foundations or questions with respect to...
Is when you talk about the 4 foundations, is that the same as the 4 frames of reference?
Yes.
It's the same.
In other words, Thanissaro Bhikkhu is emphasizing the use of the locative declension in Pali language that the Buddha used, and so locative is with respect to space, but it also means with respect to something, regarding. So when we say kaye kayanupasi viharati, kaye is in the locative. Kayanupasi is, anupasana is contemplation or repeated seeing of something. So the repeated seeing of the body, so the monk dwells, viharati, dwells with a repeated seeing of the body with respect to the body. So that everything that comes up, you're seeing the body as the body is itself. You're not seeing the body as a concept. And everything is relating back to it. So using that as a frame in order to look at anger from a completely different perspective as how it manifests itself in your breathing with respect to your body. So that's why your body becomes a frame, because you begin to see anger from that frame, and you get to see all the complexities of how anger is held in your body, and you get to see the little fingers and let go of one each at a time, and to breathe in a way that releases that anger. So that's why the importance of the locative tense and the importance of thinking of it as a frame. But it's not wrong to think of satipatthana as a foundation. Upatthana, if you just look at the verb upateti, teti is to, like, titi is to stand, and and upateti is just like even to set up a chair or a table. When I set up this table, I upatetied it, and so it does have that sense of foundation. I think even in architectural discourse and language, foundations have a similar patana use of that word. Pa is an emphatic sort of article in front of tana, which is standing. Anyway, and upa, it could also be on top of, if you look at it that way. And so something that's standing on top of something, so a foundation. Or under, in that sense. Any other comments? I do, before we end, I want to talk about where we're going next, whether you can tolerate another day of talking about the Anapanasati Sutra, or whether we shouldn't go into more depth about each of the steps. I'd like for you to try and remember these 16 steps. Just read them and attempt remembering them during the course of your meditation. Try and develop the first 4, get a grasp of those, and then feeling is not something you really need to develop. Why? How does the Buddha define feeling in the Anapanasati Sutta? As closeness to the kaya sankhara, to the in-breathing and out-breathing. Feelings of joy arise when your breathing is fabricating in a peaceful and joyful way. And you just put your mind close to that, and the mind then becomes peaceful. If it's fabricating in a stressful way, anger, greed, whatever, you put your mind close to that, and the mind's going to be shaken and unhappy. So that's where you get sukha vedana from, and dukkha vedana. It's an interesting approach. I think it's an interesting. People don't. That's very much how the Buddha defines feeling there, and those images he gives of each of the four foundations, he doesn't explain a lot elsewhere. But that closeness is also seen in the first foundation with the carpenter in the Satipatthana Sutta. Remember the carpenter, he describes the first foundation of mindfulness as a carpenter on the lathe, taking a long turn, and he knows he's taking a long turn, and then when he takes a short turn, he knows he's taking a short turn. And that's a similar type of closeness and focus there, even on the first two.
So when we're talking about bodily formation or fabrication, is that, what's the translation?
Which one? Bodily formation?
Fabrication.
Bodily fabrication, kaya sankhara.
Is that playing to the metaphor of the lathe in the sense of actually fabricating something?
I think so, very much so.
You're practicing
He uses,
trade when you're
he-
breathing?
the Buddha uses,
Your practice or something?
yeah, the Buddha uses trades all the time to talk about.
But is fabrication somehow linked up with trade?
Yes, you mean is the word sankhara?
I know it is in English, but I mean in the sense of...
Well, kar in the Sanskrit root is just to do, and it's just a root or to make together, something that's thrown together.
But you would use the same word for making an object.
But the word for skill we try to translate from kusala. It's kusala dhamma, skillful dhammas. Did I answer your question, or should I?
I'm not sure. Meaning
The images used often refer to are about skilled practitioners. He often, when he makes a comparison, he talks about a skilled practitioner does this, and he gives you a clear image. That, like, even with the first John, he describes it to a skilled bathman who can take bath powder and turn it into soap by using the right amount of water. And he presses it and kneads it so there's not extra water draining out or no part of it is dry powder.
Fabrication.
That's
That is
That's a fabrication as well.
skillful fabrication.
yeah, okay.
The word sankhara, when it's compared to dhamma, is reality without nibbana. Then when you talk about reality with nibbana, you talk about dhammas. So remember, we have all formations are impermanent. Remember that, the chant. And then, and when you can see that, you can make an end to suffering. And then all sankharas are suffering, and you can see that, you can make an end to suffering. And then all dhammas are anatta, non-self. And so when you can see that, you can make an end to suffering. And so the Buddha uses that slight choice of the word in the third part, talking about anatta, is to include nibbana in that sense. But nibbana is not suffering, nibbana is not impermanent. So that's the reason for that choice of words. So there are lots of different uses of the word sankhara, but just to give you some flavor, in this sense, I think definitely fabrication is worth. There's one of the best, I don't know if you can get a hold of the book Discernment by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He talks about how to attain enlightenment by just focusing on that factor, sankhara, in that introduction. It is available online.
It is.
And it's very short, it's less than 20 pages, but he talks about how you can just focus on how you're fabricating things and putting an end to that fabrication while watching the breath. And he takes you from the beginning of the path to the end, just focusing on sankharas. So I think that's a worthwhile summary of that view of codependent arising.
You can post it.
What's that?
So we have the chanting guidance there on the Facebook page, and the
Oh,
global conversation is there, and
Oh.
you can post it.
we can post that introduction as well. Or this one, Right Mindfulness.
Yeah.
This is also a very good book.
Yeah.
It's
I highly recommend reading it. It's called Right Mindfulness, and it's about the Anapanasati Sutra, and about how it interrelates to the Satipatthana Sutta. Because, I mean, right mindfulness fits within Anapanasati Sutra in some ways, and
Who's the author?
but it's much more narrow and
Oh,
Tanisara.
it is also.
Mhm.
Mm.
Well,
Okay.
does anyone want to? So we'll attempt one more class at this and try and go deeper again into the steps and talk about them more. It would
This,
write down your questions
Next-
and your
next
experiences.
Saturday.
Next Saturday.
Next
Write down your
Saturday.
questions and experiences and bring them. It's a holiday weekend, by the way. Maybe we could do a little, come an hour early at 3 or an hour and a half early and do a little cleaning if whoever wants to join.
on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's fine.
And then I can teach after.
So sorry, I missed your previous classes. So is
Okay.
there a way? Like, are you recording it just today's or?
No, I did what yesterday?
Last week.
Is that that was the first week I
only one
recorded.
Okay.
Sorry. I didn't.
So is it? Are you going to make it available?
Yeah, I
Recorded?
sent the last week around. I can send you the link. I've been recording it with voice memos on iPhone. I guess I can turn it off, by the way. But so there's no need to discuss